Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor and I'm a Sony Imaging Ambassador, and welcome to my FX30 camera review. Now, I don't normally review the cinema line cameras as an alpha ambassador, but I'm going to make an exception for this one because I think it enters at a price point that many alpha photographers who typically buy hybrid cameras may want to take a closer look. Of course, the big new feature is Sony's 26 megapixel backlit illuminated Aps-C or Super 35 sensor. Now, this is the first time that Sony are actually releasing a backlit illuminated sensor. All of the A6000 series cameras use a non-backlit illuminated sensor. So this certainly brings the Aps-C sensor line up to current times. Now, it does feature, of course, the Exmor R CMOS sensor, but it also includes the Beyond's XR processor. Now, it also has the in-body image stabilization, so that sensor is going to have steady shot and active steady shot. Now, I could quickly cut to the chase here and actually say that the FX30 is a half-price FX3, and that is going to be attractive for a lot of people who have looked at the FX3 and said, oh, that's a little bit pricey, maybe I should be buying the Alpha 7 IV instead. Now, of course, they've managed to reduce the price points from the FX3 by basically getting rid of the mechanical shutter and using a smaller Aps-C Super 35 sensor. So this already indicates that this camera perhaps won't be suitable for hybrid shooters who want to shoot stills as well as movies. This is going to be primarily of interest to people who are nearly always classify themselves as videographers. So if we deep dive into the menus and you go into the drive mode, in stills you'll actually see there's no continuous drive mode for burst shooting. So this is a clear indication that this is really just for videographers. Of course, the lack of mechanical shutter and the fact that it isn't a stack sensor also precludes the use of flash as well. So that is a word of warning. So you may want to tune out now, but hang on in there because there are going to be some interesting features, and I'll talk about the implications for stills photographers towards the end of this video. Now, because there's no continuous burst shooting, a lot of people will already say, well, this camera is not for me. But I have to point out that a lot of photographers can actually get the still frame that they need in 4K by shooting in 120 frames per second, not 20 or 30 such as the Alpha 1 does, but actually in 120 frames per second. I was talking to Patrick Murphy-Racy, the Sony artisan in the USA, who's a sports photographer, and he captured one of the shots that he's been waiting to capture for quite a long time of this gridiron football player at almost horizontal view with the full face and ball in view, and he captured that in 120p on his Alpha 1 camera. Now, of course, this new FX30 also does 120p, so the lack of a burst mode in stills may not put off some people who want to just extract a frame from their 4K footage. Of course, it has all of the goodies that the FX3 does have. It has the magnesium alloy chassis, it has the cooling fan, so that basically means limitless recording. That cooling fan is so quiet that it doesn't actually impact the audio. You can set up the options in the menu to have the cooling fan go dormant when recording, but it's so quiet that cooling fan noise isn't going to work its way onto your video clips anyway. It does have the dual card slot, which features the CF Express or SDXC2 cards that you can be using. Now, you will be using one of the faster CF Express cards if you're using that 120 frames per second. Now the camera is set up for what's called flexible exposure mode. Basically the whole camera configuration with the custom keys is really set up for videographers in mind. You can go into the menus and switch back to the normal PASM, that's program, aperture priority, shutter priority and manual modes, but the camera really is set up for that flexible exposure mode. This is where you hold down one of the three custom keys assigned to shutter, iris or aperture, and then with a long press you can come out of auto and go into manual or vice versa. And this is actually an excellent way to actually work in video recording. Now a lot of people are saying, okay, so I have the Alpha 7 IV, does this have any advantages over this hybrid? Of course, when you shoot in 60 frames per second on an Alpha 7 IV, you're already shooting in Aps-C Super 35 mode. So the fact that you're actually considering an Aps-C sensor may not be something that puts you off purchasing the FX30 camera. But of course, if you choose to go with the FX30 rather than the Alpha 7 IV, we do have the option for 4K 120p at that 10 bits, that's 422 footage there. That gives us 4 times slow motion if we're putting out a time line of 30 frames per second, perhaps as much as 5 times slow-mo if we're creating a 24 frames per second timeline. Okay, so just to show you this, now I'm going to be extracting stills from the 120 frames per second, and I'm not afraid of over cranking the shutter speed. Now a lot of videographers try to have a 180-degree shutter angle, but as you can see of this little clip of my dog Poppy running, I'm perfectly happy to let the shutter speed go really high, and then that gives me the option of taking out a frame that I could then use as a still, and that still will be that 4K still will be large enough for a double page spread in a magazine. So without much further ado, I'll just play this 5-second clip. And as you can see, even though we're not using the 180-degree shutter angle, I think the movement still flows enough for me, and I do get that sharper looking individual frames. One of the other things that is an advantage for having an APS-C, high resolution APS-C, and this is 26 megapixels in stills, is it does have bird IAF, and also good for people who are wanting to shoot videos of birds, because one of the great things about APS-C users is they're often using Aps-C lenses, and this is a size comparison compared to two lenses that are equivalent reach. That 70 to 350G, which is an Aps-C lens, has an equivalent full frame reach of 525 millimeters at f6.3. That's very close to Sony's FE200-600, which also has an aperture of f6.3 at that maximum reach. And of course, not only are you saving on size and weight, but also cost as well. So this might be very attractive for bird photographers who are looking to use much smaller, lighter lenses. Now I've got this chart here. I'll just quickly go down. You might want to pause the movie while you take a closer inspection. But basically the top 3 rows just show that the Alpha 7 IV and the FX30 both enjoy active steady shot, both enjoy that PP11, picture profile 11, which is that S-cine tone, which creates beautiful usable footage straight out of camera. Both have access to that 10-bit 4K quality. Now the next advantage is to the FX30 is not only can we shoot in 60p 4K, we can shoot 60p and 120p. Both of the cameras have focus breathing compensation, focus assist, focus map. Now we come into the favor of the FX30 with the next 5 lines. The FX30 has tally lights, so you can see when the camera is recording wherever you're standing in relation to the camera. It has that cooling fan for limitless recording. We have a slight weight advantage, possibly because of that lack of a mechanical shutter. We have peaking in autofocus mode, and we have a zoom rocker switch, which still will be of interest to me even though I'm using primes, because I'm going to use that in conjunction with clear image zoom, which gives me a 1.5 times zoom. We also have those 7 levels of zoom speed, so I can zoom very progressively and slowly if needed. Now the next 2 line items, the bottom 2 line items, falls in favor of the Alpha-C IV if you consider yourself as a hybrid shooter, mixing it up between shooting movies and stills, in the fact that the Alpha-C IV has an EVF or electronic viewfinder, and it has that mechanical shutter. Okay, so some people might say, why are you comparing it with a full frame camera? Surely you should be comparing it to Sony's APS-C vlogging camera, the ZV-E10. Now the ZV-E10 is a very economical, lightweight camera which will be enough of a video recording camera for many photographers. But for me, the lack of a backlit illuminated sensor, the lack of in-body image stabilization, the fact that we can't do 4K 60p or 120p, the fact that we don't have 10-bit movie recording, we don't have S-Cinetone or PP11. Those are the reasons that I'm not really interested in using the ZV-E10 for my own footage, which I want to look very cinematic. I want to be getting the maximum possible quality. I'm not there just to sell perhaps a new product. I'm here to create some long narrative documentaries with this particular camera. Now again, this is another big chart, but this highlights all of the specs between the ZV-E10, Sony's smallest full frame compact camera, the Alpha-7C, the Alpha-C IV, and the FX30 right there on the right. Now the yellow items are the items that I consider are the superior features. Now we can certainly see that we check most of the boxes with the Alpha-C IV. It's really just that 120p, the tally lights, the cooling fan, slight weight advantage that falls in favor of that FX30 for videography. And we can see we're slightly compromised with the ZV-E10 and Alpha-7C. Hopefully in future upgrades of these 2 cameras we'll see some of those features that I previously mentioned we were short of arrive on the ZV-E10 and Alpha-7C second versions of those cameras. So let's take a deeper dive into the menus of this camera. Now, as outlined in those tables, we do have that breathing compensation. Now, there are many Sony Alpha lenses now that don't have problems with breathing compensation. The new power zoom lenses and lenses such as the 35mm f1.8 have very minimal focus breathing issues. But of course, now if you are using this with a lens that does have focus breathing issues, we now have breathing compensation. You'll just magnify the view or decrease the angle of view very slightly with this on, but this might be really important if you're pulling focus and you want the subject to roughly stay the same size. And we have AF assist, and we have the focus map feature, which is an alternative for focus peaking to show you what is out of focus behind the subject and a different color for what is out of focus in front of the subject. Of course, we have that beautiful PP11 S-Cinetone profile, which is what I'm going to be using instead of the S-Log profiles for my own work. I do think even if there is a little bit overexposure in the brightest highlights, the transition between correctly exposed and being slightly clipping is very smooth with the PP11 profile, and so this is something that I would prefer to use because I don't want to be working with LUTs. This is one of the great features about the FX30, however, is you can embed the LUTs in with the video footage as you're recording, and so when you're trying to apply that LUT in post-production, it'll be sitting there in the folder for maybe somebody who's doing the post-production for you. So one of the other features of this camera, which I think will be very important for my own workflow, is the active steady shot, because I don't want to use this camera on a gimbal. I want to travel really light and be able to pull the camera out of a messenger bag really quickly and start shooting in 5 or 10 seconds. So some people will also want to buy the carrying handle, which has the ability to use the XLR microphones, but again this is probably more audio quality than I actually need, so I'm going to be using this in conjunction with Sony's much smaller digital microphones. This means that I personally wouldn't purchase this camera with the carrying handle. I might go for something something much cheaper, much lighter, and that is the small rig carrying handle there, which will attach directly onto the multi-interface shoe there. Now you can obviously the FX30 body does have attachment points to put handles and screens, etc., right directly onto the body itself, but this is a very quick attachment for me, and so this is the choice I'll be making, to use a carrying handle for those low angle of views that I'll be recording. And this will be used when I'm not using the carrying handle. I'll be using the multi-interface shoe for these digital microphones, either the lapel microphone, the Bluetooth one, or the ECM B1M or B10 microphones onto that digital interface shoe there. So this is how I'll be working with the camera. I'll be working with some very lightweight primes, the 11mm 1.8 and the new 15mm 1.4G were really designed with this camera in mind, and I'll be using both of these. Sony also have that new 1020 power zoom lens, but I have enough zoom for me just using that clear image zoom on the primes, and I will prioritize the wider apertures rather than the power zoom in the lens. Now I'll be taking a kit to the USA. In fact, as I release this movie, I'm just about to pick up a Harley Davidson. I will be in Las Vegas when I release this movie, and I'll be riding through California in support of War Child, sponsored by the premium bag manufacturer Wotancraft, and I'll be creating some motorcycle diaries as I travel. If you're wanting to make a donation to support children who have been impacted by armed conflict, such as the children in Ukraine, just head over to justgiving.com/fundraising/freedom to dream, and I will be very appreciative of any donation that you can make. So I also have a companion movie for this trip, which is What's in the Bag. This is Traveling Light, and I'll put a link to this video in the info section directly below this movie if you're wanting to see what I'm packing on this particular trip. And absolutely everything is going into this Wotancraft Pilot 7L messenger bag. If it doesn't fit in that bag, then it won't go in the motorcycle pannier, and therefore it's not going on the trip. Okay, and as I said, I will release some motorcycle diaries and create maybe a 30-minute documentary after I get back to Australia. So here's a couple of examples of the FX30 shooting. This one is with the 11mm 1.8 with the carrying handle. It's just a little bit of a beauty shot, and I do a little bit of a 5-second crane hoist there. And you can see that's steady enough without the use of a gimbal. And here it is with the 15mm 1.4G lens, and again just a small camera movement. I won't be doing like 20-minute shots with these. They'll just be a series of 5-second pulls. The rest of the longer footage will be me talking to camera, perhaps with the 11mm f1.8 attached. So I will be taking a couple of longer focal length lenses. I'll be taking the 35mm 1.8 with active steady shot that behaves like a 60mm full frame equivalent angle of view, but that does give me that figure ground separation that I will be looking for to give me that cinematic quality as well. The other lens that I'll be taking is a 90mm. Now this will behave more like this is a full frame Sigma lens, but it gives me a 135mm reach on the FX30 camera, and if I use clear image zoom, that will push it way out to 200mm. So this gives me all of the reach right from that 11mm with active steady shot on an APS-C sensor that has an equivalent of 19mm angle of view full frame, and right up to this Sigma lens, which will give me that 200mm reach with just 4 primes. And you can see this beautiful 120 4 times slower motion that I'll be able to capture of the motorcycles in action on this particular trip. So let's take a look at some of the body changes. If you're new to cinema line cameras, I'll just quickly run through some of the changes. First off, the multi-selector that you might be used to seeing on the back of your full frame camera is moved to the top of the body. So this is easier to get to when the camera is lower, and it's just a little bit easier when working with video to have the multi-selector on the top, which you move with your thumb. Okay, so the other one is that we don't have a mode dial on the top of the camera, so we have a mode button instead. So if you want to, if you recall particular memories of video settings that you've memorized or registered, you'll just press the mode and then you'll swing that front dial 1 or 2 clicks and change from MR1 to MR2, or change from movie into stills mode. We do get tally lights, okay, that's a feature of the cinema line cameras. So we get a big bright light around the record button. We also get a tally light on the front of the camera, so if we're standing in the front of the camera, we don't end up talking to the camera for 10 minutes when we're not actually recording. So that will be quite useful for people who are talking to camera. We also get a bright tally light on the back of the camera. Perhaps one of the tally lights that there's the front of camera tally light. Perhaps one of the another little light that I would like to see that isn't necessarily a tally light is I have managed to flatten the battery of the FX30 on multiple occasions. Because I'm working with Bluetooth microphones and Bluetooth grips, I sometimes close the screen so it's facing away, and I've actually forgotten to switch the camera off, so the camera doesn't actually go to sleep. It just flattens the battery, so next time I pick up the camera, I've got a completely flat battery. So I would like an option in the menus for if the screen is closed for more than 3 minutes, it disables Bluetooth and lets the camera properly go to sleep, and that will probably resolve the flattened battery. I dare say if you've been using this camera for a couple of weeks, you'll get used to switching the camera off before closing the screen, but this was something that I was trying to get used to. So we have a front record button. I perhaps won't be using this, so this is a button that I would probably want to reassign. I haven't thought of something to reassign to it yet, but I'll let you know when I do. One of the things that is very useful when you're in front of the camera, however, is the ability to swipe up with your finger and get access to all of the FN menu items. And because it's, of course, it's a touch screen, we could change any of these settings without having to run round the back of the camera. So this is an excellent feature, and this is something that I will be using. Another feature that I will be using is that zoom rocker switch, and we're able to assign 2 speeds to this zoom rocker. So we have an initial speed if we just sort of half move that zoom rocker, and then we get a faster speed perhaps if we move it more aggressively. So you can, I'll probably be setting 2 slow speed zooms, maybe speed 1 and speed 3 to that 2 different speeds that I can assign to that zoom rocker. One of the other great new features of the FX30 is touch menus are great for people who have got small fingers, but for people who have got quite fat fingers, some of the menu items are actually a little bit too small to touch accurately. So this is where we've got these new menus, these touch menus appearing on the FX30. I suspect they've also appeared on the FX3, where we can just get to the major items. We used to be able to do something similar on the stills cameras by just repeatedly pressing the display button to get to this type of view, but these are actually larger finger-friendly options that we can modify here on the FX30. Here I'm going to reprogram some of the custom keys and dials for stills. So the fact that this camera doesn't have an exposure compensation dial, one of the first things I would want to do shooting stills in aperture priority is reassign that rear dial to an exposure compensation dial. And I might also reassign some of the buttons as well. I usually like ISO auto minimum shutter speed on one of the buttons on the top of the camera, and focus area. And this is something that the FX30 will allow you to do. You will be allowed to completely customize this camera, which is initially set up for video, and fine-tune the settings for stills capture as well. So that really concludes my review of this Cinema Line FX30, which is still branded as an alpha camera, so as an alpha ambassador, and because of the price point I've been very keen to showcase some of the features for this. But what I really wanted to do now is talk about the implications for stills. Now, I'm a big fan of the Sony Aps-C 6000 series cameras, from the Alpha 6000 right through to the Alpha 6600. The last time we saw a new one of these cameras was the 6600 in 2019, and I think we're overdue an update, to be honest. There are some people who want the form factor of Aps-C, not just the camera but also the smaller lenses as well. And I don't think it's always about price point for some of these people. They want a premium camera, but we're in a lighter form factor. So the fact that we've seen a new 26 megapixel backlit illuminated sensor is a sign that we might get an updated Aps-C camera designed for either hybrid or still shooters. Now, if Sony are prepared to put an Aps-C sensor in the FX3 and rebrand it as an FX30, then I really wouldn't mind if Sony just put this new sensor in the Alpha 7C body, which is very close to the size and weight of the Alpha 6600, except this Alpha 7C has some of the upgrades that I've been wanting to appear after the Alpha 6600. Namely, we already have the USB-C in-out port on the side of the Alpha 7C, and we have an SD-XC2 card slot. What we don't have, however, on the Alpha 7C is S-Cinetone and Active Steady Shot. So if the new Aps-C backlit illuminated sensor appears in a camera the same size and weight as the Alpha 7C, then I would like to see all four of these features appear in that new Aps-C camera. And of course, the advantage for hybrid shooters and vloggers is we are going to get a 30% weight saving compared to using the FX30. That some of the features are a little bit more than I need for my vlogging trip, such as the cooling fan, which makes the body quite a lot larger. My clips only tend to be 2 or 3 minutes, and even when I'm talking to camera, they may only be 5 or 10 minutes. So I really won't need that cooling fan, and so I'm more than happy to work with a body without that cooling fan for what I need. Okay, so if you've enjoyed listening to some of this information and you're wanting to work with me more closely, I'm prepared to support you on my Alpha Support channel, which you can get to by going to patreon.com/Mark Gaylor. Now, on this forum, I have access to download camera-specific ebooks. They're usually over 500 pages large. I have Q&A forums where you can ask questions, and I will usually get back to you within 24-48 hours. I have member-only extended seminars about various topics. I also have cam set files which allow photographers to set up their late model alpha camera exactly the way as outlined in the ebook. And I've covered ebooks for most of the late model alpha cameras. I've pretty much covered all of the late model cameras since the Alpha 7 III, except for the Alpha 7S3 and the FX3, because I'm primarily a stills photographer who is now moving into a little bit of vlogging narrative work. So if you've enjoyed this FX30 review, just give me the thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll catch you over on patreon.com. I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Imaging Ambassador.